Have you ever heard the story of a man so strong that entire armies trembled at the mere mention of his name, yet so vulnerable that a single whisper in the night could bring him to his knees? This is the story of Samson, one of the most mysterious and tragic figures in the Bible. Chosen by God before his birth, blessed with strength no enemy could withstand, Samson seemed unstoppable. He tore lions apart with his bare hands, carried the gates of cities upon his shoulders, and defeated thousands of warriors armed with nothing more than a simple jawbone. But here's a question that haunts us even today. How could a man chosen by God, a man who carried such incredible power, fall not to swords or spears, but to the gentle hands of a woman? Delilah, beautiful, enigmatic, seductive. To some, she was nothing more than a tool of betrayal. To others, she was a woman trapped between fear, survival, and temptation. What truly drove her to betray Samson? Was it greed? Was it fear? Or was there something deeper, something hidden in the shadows of the human heart? The story of Samson is not only about strength and weakness, but also about the dangers of pride, the cost of misplaced trust, and the mysterious way God can still redeem our failures. His life begins in a time of great darkness, when the people of Israel groaned under the crushing weight of Philistine oppression. Armies raided their villages, stole their harvest, and spread fear across the land. And it was into this chaos that a miracle child was born, a child destined to become a living weapon in the hands of God. But before we reach the battles, before we meet Delilah, and before we witness the fall of Israel's strongest hero, we must return to the beginning, to a barren woman, a desperate prayer, and a promise from heaven that would change the fate of a nation. Because every great story of triumph and tragedy begins with a calling, and Samson's calling was unlike any other. Back in index pointing right, and so our journey begins. The story begins quietly in the hill country of Israel. A barren woman, unnamed in Scripture, longed for a child. Year after year she prayed, but her womb remained empty, until one day something extraordinary happened. An angel of the Lord appeared, radiant, unshakable, a messenger from heaven itself. His words were clear. Though you are barren, you will conceive and bear a son. He will be dedicated to God from the womb. No razor shall touch his head, for he shall be a Nazirite unto God, and he will begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. The woman was overwhelmed. Her barrenness would not end in shame. It would become the beginning of Israel's hope. When her husband, Manoah, heard the news, he too was in awe. He prayed, "Lord, let the man of God come again to teach us what we should do with this child to be born." And God, in his mercy, answered. The angel appeared once more. Manoah and his wife listened intently as the messenger repeated command. The boy must drink no wine, eat no unclean food, and his hair must never be cut. He will belong wholly to the Lord. And so Samson was born, the rise of Samson. From his youth, the Spirit of the Lord stirred within him. Unlike any other child, Samson grew not only in stature, but in a mysterious power. As he became a man, that power revealed itself in ways no one could ignore. One day, as he walked near the vineyards of Timnah, a lion suddenly leapt from the brush. Its roar split the air. Any other man would have run or died. But Samson did not run. Something surged inside him. The Spirit of God clothed him in raw strength. With his bare hands, he seized the beast. Muscles tense, breath sharp, he tore the lion apart as easily as one might tear a young goat. Yet Samson told no one. He carried the secret within himself. In time, he saw the carcass again, and inside, bees had made honey. He scooped it with his hands, sweet and golden, and ate as he walked. But this too was a sign. From death, sweetness had come. From decay, nourishment. It was a picture of his own life. A man destined to bring deliverance, but through strange and bitter paths. The Philistine oppression. But we must pause. Who were the Philistines? They were Israel's relentless enemy, a sea people who had settled along the coastal plains. With iron weapons and fortified cities, they dominated Israel's tribes, pressing them down with harsh tribute and cruelty. Samson was born into this oppression. His life's mission was not simply to be strong. It was to shake the chains of his people's slavery. And he did, in ways that terrified the Philistines. At his wedding feast, he posed a riddle to 30 Philistine companions. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. It was, of course, about the lion and the honey. They could not solve it. Furious, they threatened his bride until she coaxed the answer from Samson. Betrayed and enraged, he struck down 30 men of Ashkelon, stripped them of their garments, and stormed away. This was only the beginning. Fire in the fields. Later, when the Philistines wronged him again, Samson's anger burned hot. He caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, fastened torches between them, and released them into the Philistine fields. In a single night, their grain, their vineyards, and their olive groves were consumed in flames. The Philistines retaliated. Violence spiraled. Armies marched. But every time, Samson stood as one man against thousands. With the jawbone of a donkey, he struck down 1,000 Philistine soldiers. Alone, weary, parched, he cried to the Lord, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. Will I now die of thirst?" And God split the hollow ground, bringing forth water. Samson was unstoppable. At least, that's what it seemed. The weight of solitude. Yet strength does not erase loneliness. Again and again, Samson fought. But who stood beside him? The tribes of Israel? Often they did not. Some even bound him, handing him over to Philistines, too afraid to resist themselves. Imagine this. The man chosen to save his people, yet his own people doubted him. The victories were his, but the solitude too. And in that solitude, Samson's heart grew vulnerable. The entrance of Delilah, and then came Delilah. Her name itself carries whispers of mystery. To some, she was simply a woman of the valley of Sorek, beautiful and alluring. To others, she was the embodiment of temptation. Soft words, gentle touch, a place of rest for a weary warrior. The Philistine lords came to her with an offer. Entice him, and find out the secret of his great strength. Then we will subdue him, and each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Delilah listened. The promise of wealth glittered in her mind. But was it only greed? Or was there fear too? Fear of saying no to rulers who could crush her life in an instant? We may never know. What we do know is this. Night after night, she pressed Samson, "Tell me the secret of your strength. Tell me how you may be bound." 3 times, Samson toyed with her. He told her lies, fresh bowstrings, new ropes, woven hair into a loom. Each time, she tested him, and each time he broke free easily. But Delilah did not relent. Her persistence was relentless. Her words like dripping water, wearing down stone. "How can you say you love me when your heart is not with me?" And Samson, weary, burdened, perhaps desperate for trust, yielded. He whispered the truth. "My strength has never been my own. I am a Nazarite. My hair has never been cut. If it is shaven, I will be weak like any other man." That night, as he slept in her lap, the razor touched his head. His locks fell. The covenant was broken. And when he awoke to the cry, "The Philistines are upon you," he rose as before, but the strength was gone. Humiliation and darkness. The Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes. Bound in bronze shackles, he was led away to Gaza. The mighty lion slayer, the warrior who brought armies to their knees, now stumbled like a blind ox, grinding grain in prison. But the story was not over. For even as he turned the millstone, something unseen began to happen. His hair started to grow again. Seeds of redemption. The Philistines, drunk with victory, gathered in their temple to Dagon, their god. Thousands filled the structure, lords, leaders, and common people alike. They praised their idols, shouting, "Our God has delivered Samson into our hands." And there, in the midst of their celebration, they brought Samson out as entertainment. A broken man, mocked by the very people he had once terrified. Yet in that humiliation, something stirred in Samson's heart. Stripped of pride, stripped of sight, he began to see more clearly than ever before. His strength had never been his own. It had always belonged to the Lord. And so he prayed, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Strengthen me just once more, that I may with one blow avenge the loss of my eyes." The final act of Samson. The temple shook with laughter. Thousands of Philistines raised their voices in mockery, their jeers echoing against the stone pillars. Samson stood there, blind and broken, a shell of the man he once was. But though his eyes were gone, his vision had never been clearer. Led by a servant boy, Samson asked to be placed between the central pillars of the temple. His hands searched for the cool stone, rough beneath his fingertips. He spread his arms wide, leaning into the columns that held the weight of the structure. And there, in the midst of the noise, he whispered a prayer that was both desperate and resolute. Sovereign Lord, remember me. Strengthen me just once more. Let me, with one final act, bring down these enemies who have mocked your name. For the first time in a long time, Samson no longer sought glory for himself. This was not about pride, not about vengeance alone. It was about God's justice. The Spirit of the Lord answered. With a cry that split the air, Samson pushed with all his might. His muscles strained, his frame shook, and the pillars began to crack. The laughter of the Philistines turned into screams of terror as the great temple of Dagon groaned and gave way. Stone thundered down. Dust filled the air. And in one cataclysmic collapse, thousands of Philistines, including their lords and rulers, were crushed beneath the ruin. Samson fell with them. A hero's death. The scriptures record it simply. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than he'd killed in his life. Samson's story ends not with triumphal parades or earthly honor, but with sacrifice. He gave his life in his final act of deliverance. His family came, carried his body, and laid him to rest between Zorah and Eshtaol, where his story had begun. And so, the cycle was complete. Lessons from Samson. Samson's life is a paradox. He was chosen, empowered, and set apart by God, and yet he stumbled in weakness, pride, and desire. He was a man of immense strength, but also of deep vulnerability. What do we learn from him? First, that God's purposes can prevail even through flawed vessels. Samson's failures were real, and his downfall was tragic. Yet God used even his final moment of brokenness to fulfill his plan. Second, Samson's story reminds us that true strength does not come from hair, muscle, or might. It comes from the Lord. When Samson forgot this, he fell. But when he remembered it in humility, God answered him once more. And finally, Samson's end foreshadows a greater deliverer to come, one who, like Samson, would stretch out his arms, one who would give his life so that others might be freed. But unlike Samson, this deliverer, Jesus Christ, would rise again, conquering not only enemies of flesh and blood, but sin and death itself, a story that still speaks. As we reflect on Samson's life, we see a man who began with promise, who fell into ruin, but who found redemption in surrender. His story is not simply a tale of ancient battles. It is a mirror to our own lives. For how often do we rely on our own strength, only to find ourselves weak? How often do we crave affirmation, only to feel alone? Yet, like Samson, when we turn to God, when we pray with honest desperation, we find that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. Samson's eyes were taken, but in the end, he saw more clearly than ever before. He saw that life was never about his glory. It was always about God's. And that is the legacy of Samson, a flawed man, a lonely man, but a man who, in his final breath, found the strength to fulfill his calling.